Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. It is Kate, Kelly and PozzA here again for some Assen recap. We're not going to be covering the preview to Germany this week. Well, we are, just later in the week, because otherwise we'll be talking your ear off for an hour and a half, and no one needs that in their life. They don't need our yap. But some housekeeping before we start. We're going to start with the news that was confirmed just a wee while ago, and that is Alex Marquez will be remaining at Gresini. Not overly unexpected news, but what do you guys think about it?
Well, I think the wording, as most people would probably say, was definitely strange. Until 2026, like that could mean the end of 2025, it could mean the end of 2026. Personally, I think for stability, they would have went until the end of 2026, but I think at this point in time with the performances he's had, he only really deserves an end until 2025. I do love Alex, but I'd love to see someone else on that bike who could perform. But I can see why they did. I can see why they did keep him. He's been good to them. He hasn't been much bother, so I can see that happening. I just think the wording on the post was very, very strange. Like I still have no clue what's going on there.
Yeah, I think it's a good signing. He's shown before that he can be reliable, and he's shown flashes that he can be quick over the last few years. So if he can keep sort of building on that and start putting in some better results through this year, obviously the GP23 is shown to be not the easiest bike to ride. So maybe next year when he gets on the 24, he can start putting in some better results. But I don't think it's an awful signing.
I have to agree with both of you. It's quite a reliable signing, and it's definitely not the most curious signing that we have had in the last few days, because we speculated it last weekend and it has now been confirmed that Marco Bezzecchi will be going to Aprilia. I made my thoughts on this clear last week, and my thoughts remain clear given the weekend that Marco Bezzecchi had. And Marco Bezzecchi has now been confirmed to be going to Factory Aprilia alongside Jorge Martin. I hope that he gels with that like he gelled with the Ducati last year, but I just don't see it happening. How about you guys?
I think my thoughts were clear. Also, I am ecstatic. Um, I'm really, really excited for it. I have been waiting for it. I feel like he has so much more potential on an Aprilia than he does on the current VR46, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. His performances do look, uh, would it be mid? It's probably less. It's probably worse than mid at this point. But there is so much more to Marco Bezzecchi that I feel like we just do not see on that bike. Kind of like Joe Amir on Honda, I feel like even though it seems like he's done, there's so much more to him that we just don't see because the bike is so bad. So I think Marco to Aprilia is a really good move, and I'm so excited to see what he can do on it, especially with a teammate like Jorge. I understand Jorge is definitely what you would call an aggressive rider, but I feel like they weirdly would be able to work together very well. And yeah, I think it's a very good lineup, very strong going into 2025.
I feel like it would be really exciting for us as fans if Bezzecchi can adapt to that Aprilia and start riding it at the top level early on next season. Obviously, him and Martin together in a team is sort of just exciting in general. But yeah, hopefully he can have a better start to next year than he did this year on the Ducati and keep fighting at the front.
The last bit of housekeeping we need to cover is the news that had been speculated for quite a long time, and that is Pramaha, or the brand new Pramac and Yamaha collaboration. This is super exciting to me. Admittedly, it's a bit of a surprise for casual fans. why would you leave a known and trusted right now manufacturer in Ducati to move to Yamaha? It's quite a risk, but I think it's one that's really good for the sport. I'm just going to throw it out there. I want your guys' thoughts, and if you have speculation on riders, which you may not have because the news is still quite new, let us know what you think.
Pramac to Yamaha was, like we said, obviously a very discussed about, like, gossip topic. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't expect it to happen. It's not that I didn't want it to happen. I would have loved to have a second Yamaha team because I feel like it would have been it is going to be really good for Yamaha's development, and yeah, it's really nice to see. But I did not expect it at all. I was expecting Pramac to stay with Ducati 100%, but it's just nice to see some variation in the sport. I really prefer this, and I feel like I don't think we can call it a Yamaha comeback, but I feel like it'll just be really good for development, and it will help them in the long run. I don't currently have any ideas who will be on that bike. That's still under like deliberation. Obviously now, even though Furman Aldeguer was kind of rumored to be going to Gresini regardless, now that he's signed onto a Ducati, he physically now cannot be on the Pramac.
Something that I found interesting was what Paolo Campanotti was quoted as saying, where after the Italian GP, when Ine Bastianini made the last corner overtake on Martin, he felt that Ducati was sort of, I don't know how to word this, like sort of ignoring Martin as a factory Ducati rider. It felt like they didn't really.
No, I actually do think I know what you're saying in the fact that he got passed over, and now it feels like he's sort of been passed over again in a way, which does seem like if you're running a, junior team that seems to be a pipeline to pass over the best rider who's done every single thing right, it's a bit of a eh.
Yeah, something like that. So it's obvious that he thinks at Yamaha they will be given sort of more of an opportunity to fight the main team. Obviously, Yamaha aren't up where Ducati are at the minute, but I still think it'll also be good for Yamaha to have those two extra bikes for development, which has been their problem since they lost the two bikes originally. So I feel like Yamaha could be a lot closer to the front than they are this year in the coming years, and I feel like that'd just be better for the sport in general. And as for predictions for the seats, I do not have any, so we can just move on.
That's totally valid, and I don't really have any either off the top of my head. There's just far too much going on this silly season to even just speculate at this stage. So let's move on to the weekend's racing. We're going to start with Moto3, and I'm just going to give a quick rundown of the podium. In P3, we had David Munoz. In P2, we had Collin Veijer. And in P1, we had Ivan Ortola. But that podium does not tell the story of the race because Ortola took the win by 0.012 seconds. In the last corner on the last lap, Ortola took it. And a lot of it probably came back to the fact that Collin Veijer had a huge high side in qualifying, and it was coming out of the last corner on the last lap. And so he spoke after the race that he didn't want to push, and this could have led to him sort of going a bit more defensive than he normally would have. But either way, the Dutch fans were so disappointed that their home hero didn't win. And I'm going to go to pause first because I think we probably need to give Kelly, the huge Colin Veijer fan, a few moments more with her thoughts so she doesn't cuss out everyone and everything under the sun. So, PozzA, what are your thoughts on this race?
Yeah, it was sort of a classic Moto3 race for most of it, with a big pack at the front, and with David Munoz being in that pack, had the sort of potential to be spicy like it was last year, but with sort of 4 or 5 laps to go, it sort of felt like Colin Veijer had the win wrapped up as he cleared off. sort of letting the riders behind him battle amongst themselves. But with, I think, 2 laps to go was when Ortola started making huge inroads into Veijer's lead, and obviously going around the outside at the last corner. Not going to say that this is exactly what he did, but I just sort of wonder if Ortola knew that Veijer wouldn't be going as hard as he possibly could through the final corner, because that high side that he had on the Saturday was honestly absolutely massive, and it is kind of amazing that he came out with it with only just a sore shoulder, like he said. But yeah, it was a really good move by Ortola to steal the win at the last corner.
Moto3, that race. Heartbreaker might be the best word for it. It was a very, what word would we say? Mixed feelings, because of course I did demote Colin from the win because of the fear of the Kelly curse. So now I can say that the Kelly curse is not as severe as we all thought, or maybe even non-existent, so that's like a positive. But then at the same time, Colin didn't win, and I was really excited because he was so close, and I think we all knew he would not be going as fast as normal through that last corner purely because that high side was insane. My dad was watching it and he was like, "Is that normal?" And I was like, "High sides are. I don't think that severe is like that's how bad that crash was." And I do feel like that's how Ortola got the win. Like, fair props to him. He did what he could have. He was extremely fast and he deserved that win all on his own. I'm just depressed about it, I think. Otherwise, the race was quite entertaining. I enjoyed the whole lot of it, and yeah.
I think Kelly curse is very much real, but we will come back to that in the podcast later in the week where we recap the predictions and go into the Saxon Ring preview because, yeah, there's a whole, I suppose, chest of ideas that we could unravel with the Kelly curse. But before we move on to Moto 2, the other hot topic is the fact that David Alonso struggled this weekend. I mean, it was expected given his history with Assen. However, 2 crashes prior to the actual race, and then a fierce battle that saw him finishing in P5. I'm so very much mixed about what I think this weekend is. Although still being that good that your worst weekend or one of the worst weekends has you finishing in P5, you're a pretty strong rider in a comfortable spot. But what are your guys' thoughts on David Alonso's?
I think the most important thing about Alonso's weekend this weekend, which was sort of what helped Pedro Acosta win Moto2 last year, was making sure your bad weekends are still top 5, top 3 sort of finishes. And if you look back to last year when Danny Holgado was in almost an identical situation to Alonso, like miles clear, he qualified last and crashed on lap 1. And even this weekend, he finished down in, I think, 11th. So it's just sort of that thing where if you're going to have a bad weekend, if you can still score decent points in it, then it'll help a long way to your title charge.
He's definitely just taken it on his chin, to be honest. He's just moved on, said, "It's not my weekend, move on to the next one." He's been extremely consistent, and like Kate said, just to have your worst weekend be a P5 finish, that explains a lot. That man is definitely the most consistent out of like the entire paddock this year. So I feel like if he just carries that mentality throughout the whole year, he's probably gonna win it. I mean, that's a bold prediction. Well, not really, but like to say now it's a bit of a bold prediction, but I feel like his mentality and just his consistency has him there.
So, speaking of Alonso's, I'm going to use this as a transition because, as Esper in the Discord server says, Alonso Lopez just had a Alonso Lopez weekend and his tires dropped off in Moto 2. But before we talk about the race, I want to talk about the weekend leading up to it because it was an absolute mess. For context, Joe Roberts had a huge crash in Friday practice that left him with a broken collarbone that saw him ruled out of the rest of the weekend. Salak had a crash and he was also unfit for the weekend after a head knock in a highside, and Xavi Cardelus fractured his foot. This was prior to the race itself, and Turn 7 took no prisoners, and we will be coming back to Turn 7 later. Getting on to the race, the podium was Sergio Garcia in P3, Fermin Aldeguer in P2, and Iagura in P1. Overall, my personal opinion is it was a great race. And while the Aldeguer fangirl in me was super happy with the way it was running, it did look like he was running away with it. But then, in true Fermin fashion, he collected a long lap penalty for exceeding track limits. Fortunately, unlike Catalunya, he did keep it upright and finished in second place, which, after that long lap penalty, is pretty good going. A couple of other curious points will come because of, failed tyre management. But first, PozzA, I wanted to grab your thoughts on the race.
Yeah, it looked like up until Aldeguer got the long lap penalty, he was going to easily win with over a second and a half back to the Garcia Agura battle. But it just seems like it's another race this year where Aldeguer had a winning opportunity in his hands and he threw it away without any help from anyone else. So I feel like the team will need to sit him down a bit and sort of get him into the mindset of not exceeding track limits so much so early, because I think it was like lap 5 where he originally got the track limits warning. Just if they can sort of hammer into him the point that you don't need to push so hard so early that it sort of throws away the rest of the race, that could go a long way. But at the same time, it does seem like he's sort of taking it on the chin. In the post-race press conference, he was jokingly saying that he was the king of the long lap. So it's good to see that he's not taking it too like hard on himself. And yeah, it's good to see him back in form as well.
I did actually shockingly manage to catch the end of the race where I saw Fermin cross line P2 and I was like, oh, like literally that was my reaction. I think like everyone agrees he is very consistent in getting long lap penalties. I'm just happy he managed to keep the bike going to finish in P2. I mean, that's points. I'm happy with that. It's a podium. I feel like somebody needs to just chat to him, like genuinely just chat to him and tell him to calm down on the track limits. But I feel like it's a good result compared to some of his results this season. He has just not been on it as I thought he would be, but this is a good result for him, and I'm happy with it. I have no problem.
So we spoke about Alonso Lopez previously, but I do just want to get both your guys' take on Sergio Garcia and how his tires completely dropped off in the last couple of laps. Do you think it was because he was battling, or do you think it was just a general poor tire management thing here?
It did sort of seem like he cooked the tyres a little bit, but it also sort of seemed like into turn 5 late on that he made his own mistake, and it looked like he missed a gear sort of in the middle of the corner and had to sit up to fix that. So I wonder if just after that he sort of thought, well, I'm not going to catch and pass Aldeguer or Agura. And he had a big gap behind him to, I think it was Dixon. So I wonder if just at the end he thought, oh, I'm just going to take the podium, take the points. Obviously Roberts wasn't racing, so he got 16 points further ahead in the championship, which is realistically the important thing. So I don't think it was a bad race for him overall.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with that. It definitely looked like he absolutely cooked the tires, but by that point, I believe he had somewhat, was it a 4 second lead? I could be completely wrong with that, don't. It was 4 to 8 seconds anyway, something like that. He had a pretty solid lead to, as it was, Jake Dixon, so it was probably was the best option to just take the podium, take the points, keep it consistent. Like that's the mindset I feel like most of those riders need to have. Is just if you're on the podium, be on the podium, take the points. If you had the chance to take the win, take it. If you don't, stay where you are. I feel like that's just what Garcia was attempting to do, and it was in the end most likely the best decision.
I have to agree there. That was a very smart and I suppose possible world championship decision that Garcia made. So let's move on to MotoGP because the sprint certainly was a bit of a boring race for me, as in a 3 out of 10, and it's not one I'd watch back, which I normally watch the majority of races back. So, yeah, that shows how mild it was. The podium was Maverick Vinales in P3, Jorge Martin in P2, and Pecco Bagnaia in P1. We did see a couple of crashes. The main ones were the Aprilias, being Lorenzo Savadori, who had a pretty hard crash, which has resulted in multiple fractures of his vertebrae, and we do wish him a very speedy recovery. And the other one being Aleix Espargaro, who crashed out with a broken hand. Well, crashed out, which resulted in a broken hand, I should say, which means he does not start in the Sunday race. But overall, the sprint was quite successful for Pecco. He was quite dominant. And yeah, do you guys have any points to add on the Saturday sprint?
Was just gonna mention Mark crashing out quite early on. I definitely put too much faith in him this weekend, 100%. Because I believe I did have him on my sprint podium, as I do every other weekend. Um, I believe Alex Rins went down as well, but he did manage to get back up and keep going, but just could not keep up with the pack and finished 19th and 85 seconds down. So yeah, it was not his race, we'll say. And then of course the Repsol Honda of Luca Marini, which was just sad for me. Not a shocker. The Honda is just a death trap. Apart from that, the race was 100% mild until Aleix had that crash. I hate saying it. I hate saying crashes were probably the most entertaining part of the race, but it was. I do hope he gets better soon, 100%. And yeah, but the fact that like a crash was the most entertaining part is definitely an issue.
I was going to say the opposite. I feel like the race was made out to be a bit more mild than it was, just because there was a battle going on for sort of fourth, fifth, sixth, but they just weren't showing it. They were showing Bagnaia going fast instead of showing any actual battles throughout the field. But yeah, it's sort of a feature of Assen with the bigger bikes. It's very one line throughout almost all of the corners, and it's not a particularly like wide track. So obviously racing is going to be a bit difficult with the big bikes going as quick as they do. But yeah, it could have been better, could have been worse. That's just how racing is.
Funny you mentioned the TV direction angle, I suppose, because while on Saturday we only saw Pecco, on Sunday we didn't see any of the podium riders cross the finish line live, with the exception of Pecco Bagnaia, because it was an absolute mess. It gets frustrating sometimes. It's almost as inconsistent as the stewards are, and goodness knows we slam them enough. But let's talk about the race before I get too far carried away. The podium was Enea Bastianini, the tyre merchant, in P3, Jorge Martin in P2, and Pecco Bagnaia in P1. Personally, I think that Jorge Martin was quite incredible here, picking up that P2, because he did. I don't really know, my words are failing me. It's late in the evening, but he copped a 3 place grid penalty for slow riding on the racing line in Q2, so he started in P5. But we know that Ducati's a rocket ship, and he put in such a strong performance in the race. It was. Oh my god, I hate PozzA. it was quite a strong performance from Jorge Martin. And what are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, no, the grid penalty was most certainly deserved. However, it was the fact that it came so late. I obviously sometimes there's like the excuse of they have to download data. Sometimes it does take 2 hours. Not really. It really, really does not. The fact that all these penalties come so late after a race happens, and then every time they cross, we don't even know what the final results are going to be. It's dumb, and I think it's stupid. Am I slamming the stewards? Yes, and it's not going to sound great, but like they need to they need to do better. It just like I am actually ranting on a podcast. This is how bad it is. It's not good and it irritates me to high hell. So FIM stewards, do better. Please. Everyone is begging you at this point. It's getting irritating. Anyway, race time. It was a good race. Did I miss most of it again? Yes. Pretty irrelevant. Because, Irish bike racing, more important to me. First bike race ever. But I did manage to catch up on some of it, and I am, of course, very happy with a Pecco Bagnaia win. That man is back on form. So I'm really happy to see that Jorge Martin made a very good comeback from P5, so I'm happy with that. And then Anea in P3. I'm always happy with the Anea podium. I'm just happy. I think I said this before. I'm just very happy he's a seat for 2025. And yeah, overall it was a pretty good race, minus the fact that Marco Bezzecchi and Pedro Acosta crashed. If I forget about that and pretend it didn't happen, then it was a good race.
Yeah, it was another one where there wasn't really a battle for the lead, but the battle for, I think it was fourth place to down about seventh or eighth, was really good. Started off mainly when Marquez allowed Gian Antonio through because he noticed his tire pressures were going too low, which in the end still cost him, but that was a separate incident. Um, but yeah, did Gian Antonio look strong? It just seemed at one point they all sort of tripped up over each other and let Maverick Vinales through, and then Ine Bastianini, with his famed late race pace, sort of just decided to carve through everyone. Made a move on Marquez into turn one. Made slight contact, and Mark did end up running off. And in his post race conference, he did say that that's the reason he got that penalty, because that lap his tires dropped below the limit. But it's the same move Marquez does to pretty much everyone else in the field, so I'm glad he didn't go on complaining about it. He just took it on his chin and said, "Oh yeah, these things happen." That was nice to see.
If anyone is not going to complain about a harsh move, it's going to be Marc Marquez. Let's not forget that when Jorge Martin crashed him out at Valencia at the end of last year, he just completely understood because Martin was fighting for a championship. But let's talk about Marc Marquez because he crossed the line a lot further ahead than his official classification. You just throw me completely off there. Pause. I'm gonna just restart that. Let's talk about Marc Marquez because he crossed the line well ahead of what his results show. Because he copped a 16-second time penalty due to a low tire pressure. This came 4 hours after the race. So I live in New Zealand and I woke up to this news. Thanks to Esper again for tagging me in it and to PozzA for putting it in the podcast chat. But it kind of leaves a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth when I wake up and the results aren't what I wanted or what I knew when I went to sleep. What do you guys think about this tire pressure thing?
I do feel like there might need to be a slight adjustment of the rules, because obviously, the rules are the rules, you have to play by them. I'm not complaining about that. But it does seem a bit harsh when you get a 16-second penalty that drops you right to the bottom of the points finishing places, when the only reason you were below the tire pressure was because you did get slightly forced off by another rider and had to sort of take it easy in that sector. But yeah, rules are rules, so you can't really complain as harsh as the rules may be.
Yeah, I thought even though that it's because the tire pressure thing wasn't essentially was not even his fault. It's definitely unfair, but there has been penalties in the past for like two riders that for something that wasn't their fault. It's I don't think it's a thing they can really change. I mean, things happen. The rules are the rules. If your tire pressure is below what it needs to be, then you get a penalty. That's what happens. I just thought, even as a Mark fan, it's not even that. It's just a thing where it wasn't his fault. He was forced off. But there's nothing you can do. It is what it is, and you have to move on.
Just wanted to sort of go over some of the rookie performances across mainly Moto 2 and Moto 3, because obviously the only rookie in GP is Pedro Acosta. Starting with Moto 3, the top rookie in this race was Luca Lanetta for 658 Squadra Corsa. Honestly, it did seem like in the middle of the race he came out of absolutely nowhere to sort of put himself in the top 5, top 6. But in the end, he finished P6. Angel Piqueras took his maiden pole position in Moto 3 and ended up finishing 8th, which isn't too bad. Jacob Ralston keeps up his point streak this year, finishing in the points in every race in P14. And Joel Esteban rounded out the points in P15. Moving on to Moto 2. The top rookie, I believe, was Senna Agius. Indeed, it was, in 11th. Another good result for the Australian. It does seem like he's a lot further ahead of the rest of the rookies, which can probably come down to his experience in European Moto 2 last year. And he was the only rookie that scored points this weekend. Diogo Moreira looked strong, but it did sort of seem like in the race he faded a little bit and ended up in 16th. And the rest of the rookies finished outside of the top 20, so not much else to note there.
Faded a little bit and finishing outside of the points when you qualified P8. Just a minor detail there.